nobody really likes doing documentation.
No, I haven't. It takes a special person.
Yeah.
And
How do you mean
IT,
that? How do you mean that, David?
maybe you are that special person.
No.
But
No.
it takes a special person.
You're listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, where HIPAA and humor collide to make learning fun. Your delightful hosts are Donna Grindle and David Sims. Relax. HIPAA help is on the way.
Welcome to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast. My name is David Sims with HIPAA for MSPs, and joining me today as a guest, we have Jen Stone of SecurityMetrics. What's up, Jen?
So happy to be here.
Yeah, so from time to time, we have Donna out on PTO, and sometimes it's for good reason. Sometimes it's just because she's running away from things. But today she is out, probably out for a couple of weeks, so we're going to have some guests step in. And we got a hold of Jen last minute, and it was like, dude, can you come in and talk about some stuff? And so,
And I said, yes, but you're going to owe me, David.
Yeah, and so I do owe you. But today we're going to be talking about a really interesting topic. We're going to talk about evaluations, because that's part of what you do at SecurityMetrics. And you know,
Yes.
if I had to introduce you to people at a bar, I would say that Jen Stone she puts the value in evaluation.
Oh, that's so sweet. That's like one of the nicest things you've ever said to me.
So talk a little bit about your background and what you do at SecurityMetrics, and then we're going to dive into some really interesting questions about how to evaluate what we're doing.
Right. So my background, I spent over 20 years in IT operations before moving over to security. I also do compliance, but it's always compliance that starts with security. And so most of my work, I'm one of the principal security analysts here at SecurityMetrics. And it's like you said, I evaluate. So I don't go in and help you make your program better, because I don't have the patience for that. But I will for sure tell you what the status is. I can come in, take a look at your systems, take a look at your reports, talk to people, do processes, find out, and write you the most boring. Sorry, sometimes you ever write reports and go, does anybody ever read this? So I write these reports and tell people how they're doing. And then it gives them a baseline where they can improve. And typically I will do that either in a healthcare environment for HIPAA, or I will do that for PCI, which is, credit card security. A lot of people who are in healthcare also have to care about the credit card security. Occasionally I will evaluate against the CIS, we used to be called SANS Top 20. Standard, or one of the NIST standards. So my firm belief is that if you understand security, then you can take whatever systems are in place, whatever security program is in place, compare it against a standard, and then find out if they're in compliance against that. So, but compliance is fine. Compliance is a way to talk about security, but really the important thing is the security.
So you're kind of like a significant other. Like, you're not there to fix me.
No.
You're just there to tell me what I'm doing wrong.
You get it. That is absolutely.
All right. So yeah. It's like I need somebody else nagging me now.
Well, you do owe me a beer, so until that happens.
Yeah, I do. Absolutely. So one of the things we talked about before we hit record, which is funny because about 20 minutes in, you were like, you weren't recording any of this conversation?
Yeah, it was gold. It was.
Yeah, we should have the behind the scenes recordings that we have, because Donna and I do the same thing. Some of the things we talk about before we hit record are probably ended up being better.
Well, and it's because the topic's interesting. Like we wanted to talk about this. We wanted to talk about evaluation, and I think people, they want to understand it.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's going to be a lot of value in this for hopefully for the people listening.
Yeah, absolutely. So evaluation. Now, that's one of the terms we see in the administrative safeguards. So tell me, what does evaluation mean in the context of the administrative safeguards?
I think we need to back up and say, what are the administrative safeguards?
Okay, let's do that.
So when I talk to people, I ask them, when is the last time you read the administrative, physical, and technical safeguards under administrative simplification of the HIPAA rule? And they go, what are these words you are saying to me?
Either they say that or they say, oh, we got that covered.
Oh, yeah.
Those are the people that scare me most.
We're good. Can you just write me a report?
Yeah,
No.
and backdate it too.
Yeah. So I do want to talk about, so administrative safeguards they are a big chunk of the rules that you need to follow when you're doing HIPAA. But a lot of people don't read them because the words are hard to read. The way it's written, they don't help us out. It's hard to logically look at these things because basically the administrative safeguards is like this bundle of standards. And the standards are, if you're in IT or security and you hear the word standard, what you think is, a logical progression that is going to build a cybersecurity program.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really arranged like that. You have to kind of take it and use one of the NIST CSF or the
4 or 5D.
or 5D,
Yep.
Or don't use other.
Yeah, I would say away from that one.
advice.
I keep looking for it. I can't find the other.
Don't use the other. But you can take this rule and put it against those and know that you're doing it. So administrative safeguards has these 8 standards that are really topics. And I think it'd be kind of informative to know what those topics are.
Mm-hmm.
So the standards under administrative safeguards are security management process, assigned security responsibility, workforce security, information access management, security awareness and training, security incident procedures, contingency plan, and evaluation. And evaluation is the topic of the day.
Right.
And so when we look at what is evaluation, well, it's one of these 8 standards that's under administrative safeguards, but it's kind of it's a little bit harder kind of than the other ones because all of the other standards have underneath them implementation specifications. So for instance, under the standard contingency plan, you have the implementation specifications, data backup plan, disaster recovery plan, emergency mode operation plan. So they're implementation specifications that help you know, how do I put a contingency plan in place? And then you get to evaluation. It's the only standard under there that doesn't have implementation specifications.
Yeah, I think it says figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly the term. So
that's definitely the subtext.
Yeah. It is important to understand, and I think a lot of people don't know this really, is that when you look at the security requirements under HIPAA, and listen closely, MSPs out there, when you're looking at the security requirements under HIPAA, the administrative safeguards make up half of that.
Yeah.
And so if you're having an IT person or you are the IT person that says, I understand the technical safeguards inside and out, that's great. You're only halfway there.
Yeah.
You still have to get into the administrative side of things. And if you're hiring an IT guy and you're like, I want you to, and they do this to me all the time, I want you to make me HIPAA compliant, come in and put this technical stuff in place. And I'm like, dude, you're not even scratching the surface yet. Even if I do all those things, there's so much more you still have to do. I can't make you HIPAA compliant. I can only get you part of the way there.
Exactly. Well, and if you don't talk about the administrative safeguards, there are technical aspects of the administrative safeguards. So you can't just set those aside and say, oh, well, the business side or operate, whatever they call the side that isn't doing your technical stuff. They're responsible for the administrative safeguards. No, that's not true. It's not nearly broken down with that much demarcation between them, right?
Right.
But so I like the evaluation, and honestly, I think everybody should read the full thing and make notes. Like when a lot of us went to school, and part of going to school was taking new information, making notes until you comprehend what is being taught there. And you can do the same. Everybody can do the same thing with this law. And I think people should. And if you read something and you don't get it, there's some really good, you were talking about where to go look at it, kind of broken down in more lay terms and more understandable terms. It's under
It's the HIPAA security series that CMS put out.
Yeah.
I actually put it out back in 2007. I mean, it's been forever ago.
And it's still applicable.
Yeah. That's the easiest way to do it. When I first got introduced to HIPAA back in it was probably 2010. I had a client that was like, "You need to understand HIPAA because at some point you're going to have to deal with this." And I'm like, "Okay." And I picked up the actual law and I got through maybe the first page, certainly not even the second page. And I was like, "No, I mean, no, I'm not reading." And I put it back down and it did come around after a couple more years. I'm like, "Oh gosh, now I'm certainly, I need to learn this stuff." But I ran across the HIPAA security series, and it broke it down in ways that I think is a lot more understandable and concise, and you don't have to get through all the babble stuff, and you get the meat of
Absolutely.
it. So I like it. It's great.
I 100% agree. And now that I've said that, I'm actually going to read the language in the rule for evaluation. So, sorry, guys. But it says, I think it's important to know what it says. Perform a periodic technical and non-technical evaluation. Actually, I'm not going to read the whole paragraph. Just going to read that part. There's a whole paragraph. It starts with that phrase. There's so much in that phrase. So, periodic, what does that mean?
Every so often.
And people will ask me that all the time. What does periodic mean? Or they don't, some people don't ask me, they tell me it's periodic and we're choosing this. Really, based on what? What did you base your periodic evaluation on?
Yeah.
So periodicity should be based on risk. We have this whole thing where you're supposed to perform a risk analysis basically annually or kind of in an ongoing way. So periodic will tell you, if you look at what is your risk in association with certain cybersecurity elements that you have put in place. If you have higher risk in one, you're going to want to do it more periodically.
Yeah.
That's probably the wrong way to use that word.
It's probably like the difference between, let's say, if I tell somebody I go to the dentist periodically versus I take a shower periodically.
Right.
Even though I'm using the same word, you visually say to yourself, well, if it's a shower and you say you're doing it periodically, I'm assuming it's probably once a day, maybe even a couple times a day.
Right.
But if it's the dentist, I'm thinking, once or twice a year.
Well, and that's a really good analogy. And there's reasons, right? You wouldn't go to the dentist every day and you wouldn't only shower once a year. And so a lot of cybersecurity is like that. A lot of the HIPAA rules are like that. But it requires a conscious thought, not just, hey, we haven't done this in a while. Maybe we should do something about this. Instead, you look at your risk analysis and say, all right, how frequently should we be doing this thing? Document the periodicity based on risk. You want to be able to support the decisions that you made. Even more importantly, if somebody needs to make decisions about funding something or hiring people or those types of things, you want to be able to, if you don't, especially if you're one of the people that's kind of managing it but doesn't have decision-making ability, one of the best things you can do is document it and then say, here's this. Do you approve this? That way you're not the de facto decision maker. You don't want to be liable for something you don't have responsibility over. So instead you quantify it. You say, based on our risk, this is our periodicity. And then you take it to the person who then puts their John Hancock on it and says, yeah, we're doing it this way. So documenting things, I know nobody really likes doing documentation.
No, I haven't. It takes a special person.
Yes.
How
do you mean that, David?
Maybe you are that special person.
No,
but it takes a special person. It just is, and typically IT folks don't like to do it. I mean, that's one of the challenges, not just in my business, but any IT company I've ever talked to. They always say, if I could just get my IT folks to document things better.
Yeah.
And it's always a challenge, but I think it goes beyond that. And when you and I were talking earlier, I said in one of my past lives, I was in law enforcement, and that was my first foray into extreme documentation.
Yeah,
because
it's required even more than IT.
Oh yeah, because you would do something that would be, the incident took 15 minutes to happen, but you would spend 4 hours documenting that 15-minute incident, and it's just unbelievable the amount of paperwork involved there. And so documentation at the IT level is nowhere near that extreme. So for me, it's not as big of a deal. When I look at it, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's just 30 minutes or an hour worth of documentation. But if you've never been exposed to jobs that make you document at that level, like law enforcement, then you don't understand how easy it is to document at the HIPAA level.
In my experience, the first year I work with an organization and tell them they're missing a bunch of things and they need to shape up. That first year of getting things in place or getting me the document, because let's say they want to have a certain goodness of report, and I'll tell them what they need to do to get there, and if they're not meeting it, that putting that documentation together the first time so that you have really robust documentation that's valuable and can be used to actually run a security program that has a HIPAA slant to it. That's hard. That is hard the first time. But once you have it in place, as long as you keep doing it, as long as you keep updating that documentation based on change or changes. And I always tell people it's not just change to your systems, but it could also be change to your business. Who's in charge and why.
Yeah.
And in the healthcare world, things can change like that. Or occasionally there will be changes to or additions or modifications to the HIPAA law itself. Not very often, but we had the high-tech rule come in and that caused some modifications. So knowing what is potentially going to modify your documentation and then address that on a regular basis, then you're not recreating the wheel every time you think, oh, it's been 6 years, maybe we should look at our documentation.
Yeah. Donna and I talk about this often, where there's a reason why OCR puts a 2-year cap, a corrective action plan on people when they don't have a program in place, is because it typically takes 2 years to do that. And so that's a reasonable, if you want to be reasonable about it, you're looking at 2 years. Now, can you do it faster? Sure, you can do it faster. I always love it when somebody comes to me and they're like, we need to build a program and can we do this in 90 days? And I just laugh. I'm like, it's not that you can't, but you literally need to have somebody on this 8 hours a day, all day, every day, and you can maybe get to it. But unless you have that, then reasonable, you're looking at a year or two.
Yeah. 90 days is a pretty that's pretty aggressive.
Yeah.
And yes, occasionally small organizations that already have the foundations of a cybersecurity program in place, they can do it in a really short, less than a year. But it's fairly difficult to do that. So people need to recognize it does take time and then plan for the time it takes.
Yep.
So, all right. So evaluation is one of the administrative safeguards. We talked about, we got barely into the first. We did what is periodic, periodic, technical and non-technical evaluation. So technical and non-technical evaluations. Let's start with non-technical evaluation. In my opinion, that's where you look at the policies and procedures. Let's look, how do you do things? What is your standard flow of work and how is it related to what you're supposed to be? Are you actually following the procedures that you have documented? That's a good non-technical evaluation, right?
Yeah.
So that is where you don't have to look at system configurations and system technical reports, kind of everything else that falls into non-technical. So technical evaluation, I think some examples would be penetration testing and vulnerability scanning, doing these things internally, externally, at the network layer, at the application layer. We can kind of break those down a little bit and why you would want to use them. But in general, especially if you have either a third party or somebody else that's not related to so somebody who doesn't have skin in your game, running these reports and telling you what kinds of vulnerabilities they're finding or what kind of issues they're seeing, that's when your technical evaluation becomes really valuable.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because we often have conversations with companies and they'll say either we've got an IT team or we have other outsourced IT. And just like you said, my recommendation is always bring somebody else in, put
Yeah.
another set of eyes on there, because if they don't see the problem, it just may be the fact they don't know that there's a problem there, or maybe they're not telling you because it reflects on them. Typically,
Yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. Most of the time, it's not that an IT firm is being malicious. In other words, they're not purposely putting you in harm's way. They just missed something.
Mm-hmm.
But there is also that fear that, another IT company is going to come in and badmouth what you're doing and all that. And so you have to have somebody that you can trust to come in and say, look, we found these issues. We're not saying that there's something wrong with your IT firm.
Yeah.
People are going to miss stuff. We're just saying, here's what we found, and have them shore it up. Doesn't mean they're bad.
It also gives a chance for that healthy back and forth, because I mean, IT folk, we love to argue, and
Yeah, don't we do?
and sometimes you get some really good value out of the argument. So you have a third party come in and run a vulnerability scan and say, we found these vulnerabilities doing this particular scan, and the internal folks go, yeah, but it's not a problem because we know these things, and the external people say, well, but did you think about how this might affect it? And the internal guys go, well, maybe. And so it becomes, a conversation, especially when you can get a healthy supportive feeling there, like you just said. They're looking at things from two different perspectives, and maybe the internal team has more knowledge of something, but maybe also they're kind of relying on something that's kind of supporting security and letting a vulnerability go, when the third party is like, you know what, we've seen this several places elsewhere, and we saw specifically in this other place where the vulnerability we're seeing with you actually got popped. The bad guys got in and there was a breach, and here's how that happened. And then the internal guys go, oh, wow, we were so busy on making things run that we weren't paying attention to everything out there on what's happening in terms of malicious actors getting in. Right? So that third party evaluation is important. And even another layer of it is this. So you get the third party to run the scan, and here's the vulnerabilities. This gets shared with the internal team, but it also gets shared with oversight, right? So you need some sort of oversight or governance to say, all right, these guys are doing this. This is the conversation here. This is the fix they want. This is the fix they want. I am the decision maker because I'm the one that understands the risk appetite of this organization and what we're trying to accomplish and where the funds need to go, right? So that way, you're not putting your IT folk in the position of having to make decisions for the business when there might be other things that also are important that they don't weigh in on, right? So that's the way I've seen that third party really start to bring value to the whole conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, we often do that in my IT firm, where there's conversation about security or how something is set up or whatever, and I chime in and say, that's not our decision to make. This is the client's decision to make. I can tell you what I would do, but ultimately it's their environment and they need to make this choice, because there's different factors around that. And so not always do we make them make a choice, because we'd be doing that all day long. But there are times when it becomes the choice of the client. What do you want to do here?
Yeah. And being able to put it into language where they can understand and make that decision. And so you as a third party, you have a little bit of distance from the question. Sometimes internal IT teams are very wrapped up in the question and they want to give the answer. So helping them understand that they should have a little more distance and allow the business to make that decision, it can make them a healthier work environment for them too.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to bring up is kind of an analogy for evaluation, because sometimes when I talk to people about evaluating things, they glaze over. Like, you see their eyes just like,
Yeah.
And it's the same thing that I say when we talk about risk assessments. I always tell people that you're doing risk assessments all the time. And we give all these scenarios about how we do that in daily life. But we do the same thing with evaluation. Like when I'm leaving my house and I lock my door, and I have one of the little keypad locks, every time I do it, I always turn the lock to make sure that it actually locked. Or if I'm walking away from my car, I often will turn around and look to make sure the little thing's down, or
Right.
I'll pull on the door handle or something like that. What I'm doing is I'm doing an evaluation of the
Mhm.
security control.
Exactly. So let's give an example. So one of the things everybody's familiar with is patching, right?
Mhm.
So you've got a system, oh, you have to patch it because you got a little notification, or it's centrally managed patching as needs to happen, and in some way you're informed of that. But the question is, did that patch, was it successfully applied?
Mm.
And so sometimes you can have like central dashboards that tell you that. But another good way to do it is through some internal vulnerability scanning. So in internal vulnerability scans, you can have these tools that have amazing functionality. One of the functionality pieces is, are patches that should be applied? Or do you have a system that's vulnerable because patches weren't applied in some way?
Mhm.
So that's one thing that a vulnerability scan can surface. And I really like not annual, monthly. I like monthly vulnerability scans internally just for that reason.
Yeah.
Another thing that some of these tools can do is, they can tell you if a password is not meeting a standard, or if multi-factor authentication is not in place. Not all of your internal vulnerability scanning has this functionality. They have different functionalities, but depending on what you want to evaluate, you
Mhm.
get different scans. And of course, they come with different price points. And so, but again, it comes back to that risk analysis that you've done.
Mhm.
What is our risk telling us? What is our risk level telling us we need to spend on tooling to give us assurance, right?
Yeah.
When we evaluate.
Yeah, I want to hang there for just a second because there's a massive difference between a vulnerability scan and vulnerability management. And
Yeah.
and you've hit on both of them, and I want to differentiate those. So a
Yeah.
vulnerability scan is simply that. It's a scan, it's a snapshot in time of what things look like. Whereas vulnerability management, or some people call it a vulnerability program or something like that. But basically, what you're doing there is you're not just doing that snapshot in time, but you're also fixing the things that it found,
Yeah.
reevaluating that those things are fixed, like you said, and then
Yeah.
rerunning another scan on a
Exactly.
on a quote unquote periodic basis.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I agree with you. Monthly, I would say my opinion is that monthly should be the minimum.
The bare minimum. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like don't go any more than that. I have people call me sometimes like, "I wanna do my annual vulnerability scan," and I'm like, "Why?"
Why? That's not of use.
Yeah, I mean, okay, but you're not even having me come back in to rescan, within a time frame. You're just like, "Scan it, tell me what you find." I'm like, "Okay, great. I find it today." Even if you fixed it, there's another vulnerability tomorrow.
Exactly. Something else is happening all the time. But I think maybe sometimes that's because people will confuse a vulnerability scan with a penetration test.
Yeah.
And so maybe we should just kind of talk about some of the differences of some of these things.
Yeah, just the
Oh,
just the thing, just penetration testing is confusing, and we can talk more about the types of penetration test and why it
yeah.
is. But anyway, let's go ahead. You lead that.
Okay. Well, I think vulnerability scanning is a great place to start because you can have an internal team run that. And
Mhm.
it's okay to have an internal team run these vulnerability scans because they're automated and they're going to tell you what they're going to tell you,
Mhm.
right? And as long as you have some oversight on, oh, yeah, I saw the scan. Yes, I saw the work that was done to fix it. Oh, and I saw the rescan that shows that it was so, but this is automated, right? And then vulnerability scanning can be done from different, what we call perspectives. And generally, those perspectives are an external perspective where you're outside of your environment, or which is an environment is made up of networking equipment and servers and all of the uh, physical or virtual systems that make up your environment. If you're outside of that, from coming in from the internet and looking at it, that's an external vulnerability scan. If
Mhm.
you are running the scan the call is coming from inside the house, David. If you're running the scan from inside, then that's an internal vulnerability scan. And
Mhm.
then there's even more differentiating. You can run internal vulnerability scans authenticated, and you can run them unauthenticated. And basically that's just like, does your scan have the keys to the kingdom to be able to say to a system, no, give me more of your info? That's authenticated. And kind of more surface level is unauthenticated, right? And so depending on the level of information you need, and also whether your system's going to fall over if you do an authenticated scan. Some of these legacy systems are like, I cannot do authenticated.
Yeah, I love it when I say, do you want to do an authenticated scan? And they go, yeah, here's the username and password. And I'm like, you meant usernames and passwords? No,
Yeah.
no, just the one. Everybody uses just the one.
Oh.
I'm like, we can stop right here. We don't really need to do a
hey, time out. Let's fix this problem first. So those scans are great. And I think there's a lot of juice to that. Well, external vulnerability scans, there's value in that too, because if you find a vulnerability from an external vulnerability scan, I guarantee you there's automated scanning happening all the time. They don't even have to know how big you are. They don't have to know what you do. That the malicious actors just have these automated scannings happening all the time from outside in. So you want to make sure that you find your vulnerabilities before they find your vulnerabilities. Starts with the external, move on to your internal, fix the things as you go, rescan. It's like you said, what is the point in scanning if you don't fix and rescan?
Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I just don't know.
Okay, so let's all agree. Let's take the pledge right now. We are going to scan, fix, and rescan, and fix and rescan, and
yeah, it's a continuous loop.
It's the circle of life right there. So, but a lot of people will say we've done our penetration testing. What they mean is they did vulnerability scans.
Yeah,
and it's not the same thing. So vulnerability scanning is often the first step in penetration testing, but it's not, it doesn't go as deep. Penetration testing typically is run on a manually, using manual tools, really diving deep and saying, all right, I found this vulnerability in the scan. Can I exploit it? Can I get to the juice inside your systems? And so penetration testing is very important, but I often will say, don't do it as often because it's expensive. Mm-hmm. And so you kind of have to, weigh, are we going to do this penetration testing? How often? Well, it depends on
periodically.
Periodically, it depends on your risk analysis, right?
Yeah. That's a different periodically for me, penetration testing. And then you got to know what type of penetration testing you even want.
Yeah.
Because you've got things like you've got a network penetration test, you've got a web application penetration test, you've got a wireless penetration test, you've got physical penetration testing, social engineering penetration testing,
those are
IoT
fun.
penetration testing, client side. So it's just on and on and on and on. Like for us, we do some penetration testing. Like we can do the social engineering and the physical penetration testing. We stay away from some of the other ones because we're not geared for those.
And we don't do SecurityMetrics. We don't do social engineering penetration testing, and we don't do physical like you do, but we do a lot of the technical penetration testing usually. And here's another aspect to that: white box versus black box. Mm-hmm. So people are always like, well, I want to do a penetration test, but I don't want to tell you anything about my systems. Okay, this is going to be really expensive, and I'll tell you why. It takes forever to get into the systems and then get in, farther and farther. Let's say you have a database full of VPHI. And you say to someone, I want you to do black box penetration testing. In other words, I'm not going to tell you anything about my systems, but I want you to tell me what it takes to get to that central core. Well, okay, it might start with social engineering. Okay, how long is that going to take? And so the time that it takes to get, and you can always eventually get it, some kind of username, password, you can find a way in. But but then if all you're doing is taking those steps, you're not getting to where you want to be to test all of the things. And so we often say, you want to do the white box where you have some sort of credentials to get in, because it's going to make the test cheaper and it's going to really evaluate the technical things that you want to evaluate.
It depends on, what is it that you're trying to test or trying to prove? And that's where you
Yeah.
go from there. But I listen to Darknet Diaries often, and they talk to penetration testers, and there's times when they're talking about, we had 4 people on site for a month, and I'm thinking, gosh, that had to be massively expensive to do that.
Oh, can you imagine? Yeah. Paying 4 people for a month for something that it is highly skilled.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, yeah, it's way in the 5, probably 6 figures.
Yep. And if your risk level of your organization demands something like that, then you do it. But if the risk level at your organization is not that high, then you're not going to pay for that. And how are you going to know what your risk level is, David?
Yeah, not that we hadn't talked about that.
I bet everybody knows the answer to that. Now I'm never going to see the words.
Yeah, I will say too that when you're looking at, let's say you're paying somebody to do vulnerability and penetration testing, this is one of those areas I tell people you really need to know a little bit about what you're asking. You don't have to know how to do a penetration test to buy a penetration test, but you talking about people fleecing the flock out there. Penetration tests and vulnerability scanning is where people can screw you over because you don't have any idea what you're getting. Often you're not asking the right questions, and you certainly need to go to people you trust and ask. If you get a price of, one guy's giving you a price of 1,000, another guy's giving you a price of 10,000. It might not be that the $10,000 guy is the bad guy. But you
might have a better grasp of what it is you're trying to accomplish.
Right. But there's a lot of questions you need to ask, and certainly bring people in that you trust.
And it's not easy. Some of the hardest, so our sales team, especially if they are working with new people, sometimes bring in one of the security analysts, and I'm one of the people that will sit in on calls and scope the environment. And by scope the environment, I ask a lot of kind of deep technical questions on how do you do what you do? How is it set up? What is your environment like? So that I can give my opinion on how a penetration test will function. What it is that you're trying to, whatever you're trying to protect is what we're trying to get to, basically. But from an application layer or an API layer, we're looking at those penetration tests. How many different role types do you have on your publicly facing application, for example? That's going to affect the price of a penetration test because it affects the scope of a penetration test. So if you don't really have a good idea of what you're trying to test, then you need a partner that's going to be able to say, here's how I would do it. Tell me what you do. Tell me what you're trying to protect. Here's what I would do. And if they can't explain to you clearly what it is that they would test and why, then go to someone else. Find out from someone else.
Yeah.
Don't sell something until you really understand it.
Yeah, I know in the IT world, it's sometimes even difficult for us to understand what vendors are trying to sell. And because oftentimes they come in with the pitch of, here's this thing where you can run this scan and give this report and charge $2,500. And I'm like, wow. I would be very careful of that, because what value is that really to the client? You're talking about, you're just going to do a scan, him report, and you're charging $2,500. And to our conversation earlier, even if the report is accurate, that means things have to be fixed and rescanned. And so if you're going to charge $2,500, you need to be doing more than just running the initial scan.
Oh yeah. There's got to be a rescan as part of that. So it's something that if you haven't been through it before, it can be really a frustrating experience for organizations that are trying to figure out, what does vulnerability scanning look like? And how does that feed into vulnerability management that we were just talking about? And then what's the cadence for, what's a reasonable rescan period that makes it so it even means anything before it becomes a new scan? and then what are the penetration tests? We haven't even talked about all the different kinds. There's that people ask me, well, what about red teaming? What is that red teaming thing?
Yeah.
Like, did you go to DEF CON?
Sounds good.
You know what? I skipped out of DEF CON this year. I probably shouldn't say that, but I had my tickets. I was ready to go. And in the end, I was like, I can't. Sometimes sometimes I can't deal with conferences. And this was one of those times, but I'll go and read all the stuff and I'll watch the videos. But sometimes walking around shoulder to shoulder with people in Vegas is just too much for me.
Yeah, they just had DEF CON, so there's a lot of stuff coming out about it. Lots of articles and things about the sessions. So I'm reading all those. I haven't been to DEF CON. It's one of those things where if I go, I probably won't take my phone or my computer.
Yeah, no, and it's a good experience for one time, but I think it's a lot. It's just a lot of people.
The hotels have to be terrified that week.
Oh yeah. There's a lot of shenanigans for sure. But if you look at what is red teaming, that's where somebody comes in and tries to get through your systems, actively tries to breach them, and your blue team, which is the defenders on the inside, the people who are trying to make sure that you're secure. Mm-hmm. They're looking for indicators of compromise, that's like the phrase we use for knowing something bad's happening. So you've got a group of people that are evaluating your network traffic, your indicators of compromise. This might be a third party. And then you bring a red team in and they're trying to knock those defenses down. Sometimes organizations don't even tell the blue team that the red team's coming in, which I think is really rude. But
yeah,
one way to do it.
We've done that kind of thing with our internal teams. Don and I both did it, and we recorded a podcast about it. It's been a couple of years ago now, but we had somebody attacking our people, and not from a technical standpoint, but from a social engineering standpoint. They were being were being attacked, and it was very funny for Don and I both to act like we didn't know what was going on, and to watch our teams, in kind of, I wouldn't say panic mode, but more of high alert, bells ringing and whistles blowing, and and you have to respond as if you don't know what's going on. The whole time we know what's going on. But yeah, it's well worth it. It was well worth the price to do it, if nothing else, to see, even if you pass, you can go, wow, we did a fantastic job. All the training and stuff we're doing is working.
Right. And I love that when I get a group that has really clean scans or a really great response to whatever test, technical or non-technical, because it's not wasted time and money. You're proving that what you're doing is you're on the right track. Yeah. And because if you don't do these evaluations, how do you adjust? How do you learn and adjust if you haven't tested what you think is properly in
right.
place?
And if you can't prove it, then none of it matters.
Exactly. And if you can prove it, man, that feels good.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You're like, okay, we got a program. We're rolling along. Look at these scans. Look how our scans have improved. Time after time. Year on year. I have some groups that I work with that they're very proud of the fact that they have a mature process that they can lean on and know they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. If you don't have that kind of organized, mature process in place, with the evaluation piece being a really critical part of it, then you're kind of floundering in the dark.
Yeah, absolutely. So what was the next question that you had that you wanted to bring up? Because I know there was one about maybe we covered it. It was more of the technical evaluation fit.
Oh, how does technical evaluation fit with the broader idea of a vulnerability management program? And I don't think we can emphasize this too much, because this is the third time we've really brought it up, which is if you run a report and don't act on it, what the heck?
Yeah.
It has to, this is, okay, we have this report, how are we going to improve? And so Occasionally, I will have a group that I work with where I go and spend days on site with them and spend months on the lead up to it, gathering the information, making sure they understand what I'm going to look at, interviewing people, looking at things in real time, looking at the reports that from the technical evaluation that they've done. I write up, extensive reports, hand it to them, and they say, great, we're going to have you back again next year. Okay, terrific. Can't wait to see what you do to fix these things. Come back the next year, and maybe one policy has been improved. And that's so disheartening. And then I have to give them to one of my colleagues because I just get sad.
Oh, man.
I don't want to work with customers that make me sad. Or I'll get this. Are you going to fix these things now? Well, what do you mean? I can't create a remediation program for you. I don't know who your people are that can fix these things. I can't assign people or spend your money. You guys have to do some work now.
Yeah. And what do you mean? You're not going to do all this for us?
No.
Yeah. It's also worth talking about too, when we're looking at things on the technical side. We talked about this before we started recording as well, that when you look at things that you put in place, you want to confirm that they're there. So let's just say anti-malware. You want to confirm that it's there, it's configured properly, and all those things. So you have that step of confirmation and evaluation. So it's there. The next step is harder. So the next step is, can you confirm, can you evaluate that it's functioning properly? It's set up properly. Is it functioning properly? When we look at something like the network, it's like I can set up a network share. I can see that it's there and it's configured. I can test the functionality and making sure that right people can get to it and the other people can't get to it. I can test it there. But when we're looking at things like anti-malware, unless you can throw something at it, you're not really able to test, is it actually functioning the way it should be functioning? Right. And so it's a harder thing. And we do this somewhat like within our backups. Like we have backups in place. We can see that they're there. We can see that the settings are correct, but how are we actually testing that the backup is functional? And it's called a recovery test, Yeah. And
did you actually try and recover?
And I scream this all the time from this podcast as well as in person. You're not buying backup. Stop buying backup. You're buying the ability to recover your data. And I don't care about a backup report. I want to see a recovery report.
What's interesting is the people who work with a backup company, and the backup company is very clear. We take care of your backups. We don't do your recovery, but somehow organizations don't hear the part where we don't do your recovery. And then I'll say, all right, who is doing the recovery piece? And have they tested this? And they go, what?
Yeah. Or even bigger, we have the conversation all the time about people that they're using Office 3 or Microsoft 365, or they're using Google, and they say, well, Microsoft and Google, they do backups. And I'm like, yeah, but no. Like, they're not going to recover your data.
No, they don't do they don't do backups in the way that would fit the what the specifications in any way.
And we ran into this years ago with a client who had deleted some data in their Google account, and we went to Google, and they're like, "No, we can't recover that for you." And I found this out the hard way too, that there are other cloud services like QuickBooks Online, they don't back up your data either. And it's in their terms. It's like, look, backup is on you.
Yeah.
And there's no undo button with QuickBooks Online. If you're using QuickBooks Online and you don't have a backup, you are waiting for a disaster to happen. Trust me, been there, done that, paid a fortune to fix it. And that's one of those times where you find out the wrong way that backups aren't happening. And it's like, I'm looking for the undo button because somebody screwed something up, and there's no undo button. And like $5,000 later after fixing that, we have backups now.
And that's why you want to do evaluation. And again, it comes back to your risk analysis. What are the things that are most critical to making sure your business is running?
Mm-hmm.
Have you tested the things involved with making sure your business is running? And so throughout the healthcare world, most of the groups that I work with are actually business associates. And they know very clearly what that business is. But sometimes in the healthcare world, it's very complex. There's a lot of things that are critical to making sure people are treated, in a critical situation. And so there's a lot of evaluation that has to be done in those situations to know that you are ready, that what you have in place is actually adequate.
Yeah. So there's a lot there to think about. So, and I think we've given everybody a lot to think about and talk about.
Yeah, I think we have.
So
yeah.
There you go. As I said in the beginning, you bring the value in evaluation.
Thanks, David.
But as we wrap up here, tell people where to find you. I don't think we mentioned in the beginning, but you are also a podcaster. So what is your podcast and all that stuff?
Yeah, it's just the SecurityMetrics podcast. I tell people it is the biggest overcommit of my life, because when the marketing team, they were trying to get somebody to host it from somewhere, and eventually they came over to the audit team, and I happened to be in the office that day, and they said, "Hey, we're looking for someone to host the podcast." And I said, "That sounds fun, because then I get to talk to people that I think are interesting, right?" And I thought, oh, surely this will be just like, we'll do a half dozen, and the marketing team will say, "Thanks, we're going to go on and do other things now." Here I am 4 years later. I'm still doing it. About every 2 weeks, we put out something. But it's it's actually a joy to do. I really enjoy talking to people about cybersecurity and compliance, and they can be really fun topics.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to meet you and Donna.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we also had you at the last PriceTech boot camp too, so that was fun.
Which was awesome. If people have heard of the PriceTech boot camp and have not gone, why? What, guys?
Yeah,
get on board. That boot camp, solidly full of good, juicy information.
Yeah. The funny part is when the vendors themselves are like, "Dude, this thing was amazing." It's like the vendors got as much out of it as the other people there.
Oh, absolutely. So good. I don't think there's anybody that teaches HIPAA better than you do at that boot camp.
Yeah. Donna does a fantabulous job on that
stuff.
It's
amazing.
Yeah, that's her calling in life.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's wrap up here. And again, thanks for stepping up and stepping in. And we appreciate it. And we'll see you again next time.
You're very welcome. Take care.
You've been listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, hosted by Donna Grindle and David Sims. The show created to help you with HIPAA. For more information or to ask us a question, visit our website at helpmewithhipaa.com. Neither Donna Grindle or David Sims are attorneys, and they do not offer binding legal advice concerning regulatory compliance. The information in this podcast should not be relied upon or construed as legal advice in any way. Consult your attorney for legal advice concerning compliance with HIPAA regulations.